Welcome to the James and Heather Show. I'm Heather Dawn.
And I'm James Guay, and we're giving you the best of health, love, relationship advice.
Yes, well, I'm going to give you the best. He will give you just advice.
Just mediocre.
And then Bridget happens to be our guest.
We have a special guest, Bridget Phetasy.
Bridget Phetasy. She's very, very special at giving useless advice.
Yes, the worst advice.
Ever.
I'm like, what not to do.
And our topic today is sex, love, and substance abuse.
Sex, love, and drugs. You heard that
title.
sigh because
it's
she's
like,
got things to share.
The good old days.
Well,
yes.
So tell us a little bit about what brings you to this topic and
Besides
who you are.
your amazing blogging skills, which
Oh my gosh,
she is.
Playboy blogger here.
And the fix, right?
Yes,
Yep,
the fix. That's so sex, love, and substance abuse. Well, I write the sex and love column for Playboy, and I also write for the recovery site, The Fix, just doing some freelance stuff. So I'm in recovery. I've been sober now. I just hit 40 months yesterday,
Wow.
actually.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's the longest I've been sober since I was 12.
Wow. What was your choice of substance?
Everything. But I
Equal
I love
opportunity.
Equal opportunity substance. It's like Shoney's
it's like
buffet.
whack-a-mole. And basically, it's like, I
Little
won't
this,
drink, and
little
then
that.
everything. But alcohol. I started with alcohol, and then I accelerated to. I was in treatment for heroin by the time I was 19.
Wow. Wow, that's intense.
And then I got out and was like, well, if I never do heroin again, I'm not an addict. So I never did, but I continued to do every other drug under the sun. And I continued to drink, and I was a daily marijuana smoker. And then I tried to kind of manage it always because I had that young stint in rehab. I think I always knew that I had that addictive personality. So I tried to manage by doing things like yoga or doing only going on the marijuana maintenance program, as I think many people call it now. I did no brown liquors, wine only drink with friends, only drink alone. It was like
A lot of negotiating, trying to make moderation work for
and
you.
I knew that it was interesting because in rehab when I was 19, they said any attempt to control your use is a sign that you have a problem with anything.
Which is interesting because when talking about the symptoms of substance abuse, one of the things is trying to control it.
Right.
Craving for the substance, failure to control it.
Well, then a couple other signs of like having tolerance for a particular substance, right?
Yeah.
And if you go without the substance for a period of time, some aspect of withdrawal,
Yeah.
right? So these are some components of substance use disorder or addiction, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Right?
Increased use, right? Because of you get
Well, it's
tolerant to it.
progressive, yeah.
Right. And
Or reaching out for a bigger high. So it's like the alcohol stops working, so then you start smoking weed and drinking, and then that's not enough, and then you start adding other drugs, or I mean, everyone's kind of progression, I think, into addiction. And it's not just substances. It can be sex, relationships, food. I think that what I've realized in my experience is that once I took away the drugs and the alcohol, I was left with just this like crazy mind that is really just addictive in general. So anything, meditation, running, yoga, I got kind of addicted to. I can turn anything into something that I'm abusing.
It's interesting because you're talking about addiction and then you're also using compulsive behaviors. And there's a slight difference between compulsion and addiction, right?
Sure.
Addiction is more of a brain disease. Why don't you elaborate? I know you have.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's not necessarily consensus on the definition of addiction, right? In the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, it used to be that this was termed substance abuse or substance dependence. Now, in the most recent update, it's called substance use disorder, or like alcohol use disorder, or tobacco use disorder, or stimulant use disorder, those kinds of things. And Again, it's there's, at least in the DSM, there's also no other sort of forms of addiction other than sort of a gambling disorder.
Right.
They haven't ruled that sex or love or relationships is a disorder, even though it can feel for people like there's this
It's
habitual pattern that
control.
feels out of control, that feels uncomfortable. I think to your point, any activity can be used to help us, and any activity can be used in a way that's harmful to us.
But
Right?
I think also too, what would probably differentiate is that if you see something as becoming harmful and you can't stop despite the harmful consequences,
Right.
then you have an issue, no matter what you'd like to call it.
Right, whatever you name it,
Right.
right? Do you have problematic behavior as it relates to substances or behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And so let's
The
take a
label
look
is
at
the label.
Yeah, let's take a look at what's underneath that. What's
I think there was just
perpetuating that.
recently a study that was done that they said, sex addiction is basically bullshit.
There's a lot of studies on that.
We've had guests to say the same thing, actually.
Yeah.
Down here.
I'm not exactly sure what makes something, what's the actual definition of addiction. Because I think that the same chemicals that you get from being in love or I do know people who will ruin their life in a relationship, a toxic relationship, because they're addicted to the chemical whatever that they're getting that fix. And the brain is the most powerful pharmaceutical company in the world. So to think that like you can't get addicted to things like love or sex, I think it's like, I guess it depends on what your definition is.
Right.
Because maybe you don't suffer those extreme physical withdrawals that you would suffer from like an actual substance.
Right.
But I do know a lot of men and women who have destroyed their lives in bad relationships.
Yeah, there could be problematic behaviors regardless of what you call it, right? And I think to your earlier point, the difference between sort of what we see, at least clinically, as a compulsion is that it's a behavior that deals with an obsessive thinking, right? So for example, if someone's obsessing about cleanliness, right? The behavior can be like hand washing over and over and over again to lessen the obsession, right? So that's
There's an obsession I wish I had.
They say that all hypochondriacs are OCD.
Really?
Like the base of all hypochondria,
Why
because
couldn't I
it's
get
the
the cleaning
obsession.
one? Why couldn't I get the
I
cleaning
have
one?
that one.
You want to come over?
Sure.
I pay.
When I was a party girl, I was always the girl that was cleaning at
Cleaning
that,
up
like,
after
in the morning, like picking up all the cups, going around and cleaning.
But here are some interesting and sort of sad facts that the Center of Disease Control talked about in terms of stats when you're dealing with substance abuse issues. 88,000 people die a year related to booze. 480,000 die a year related to cigarette smoking or tobacco addiction. Opioids, 17,000 people die a year related to opioid deaths.
I feel like it's more now.
Well, this was just stats that I pulled up from
Really?
the DSM that are just recent, but it probably could, because I think these were listed in 2015 or 16.
Okay.
There's a whole nother year for people to pass.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an epidemic right now in the country. The opioid thing is bad.
Yeah, the opioid seemed
Like
low
the whole,
to me.
it is, because I feel
opioid
like
seemed
it
low
just
to me.
beat, I don't know, I was reading an article, I would have to look it up, but I know that it just, it took over like another stat of deaths, so.
I have no doubt. This was just some stats I picked up in the DSM, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it needs to be updated, and there's always tons of studies. The point being that, again, when you're looking, whatever you want to call it, addiction, compulsion, use disorder, at the end of the day, if you can't stop a particular behavior, despite its harmful effects, aka death would be one of them, you know you got an issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Relationships, toxic relationships, and so forth. And I believe that there's a cycle that I was reading about when people who are dealing with substance abuse, get out of it, but then they get into a toxic relationship.
Oh yeah,
There
that's
could be
very
cross
common.
addiction.
They go back into the
or
substance abuse because of
cross-problematic
the toxic
behaviors.
relationships.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly, and that becomes a very interesting cycle. to
No,
say
it
the
is
least.
like whack-a-mole. I mean, honestly, you have to deal with the brain. You know, whether it's compulsive behavior or addiction or compulsive behavior that leads to addiction, you still have to try and give yourself tools that will help you with that cycle. Whether it's a cycle in a relationship or sugar is another one that people are very addicted
Very
to.
big and popular right now, the sugar stuff.
Heart disease is the number one killer in America. I mean, I remember it as a kid getting that sugar high.
Oh, totally.
And even now that I'm, relatively clean and substance free, other than caffeine and sugar, when I eat something that's really sweet, like candy, I will feel that rush.
Yeah.
Well, so going back to substance addiction and use, what was it about 3.5 years ago that you decided to sort of do this differently? Like what happened for you there?
I think that it had been, as I said, I was 19 when I first experienced being
Just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, right. It's almost 20 years ago now. Holy shit. It was, I always knew, and then spent most of my 20s kind of either being in full-blown alcoholism or running from that fact, trying to run from the idea that I couldn't manage it or moderate it, or trying to moderate it. And then in my early 30s, I did an experimental year of sobriety to see if I could do a year. And I didn't have any sober friends, so I entered into like a program just to meet sober people.
Right.
And what I didn't realize was that experimental year, I went back out and traveled the world and drank and, should have ended up on Locked Up Abroad, but didn't. And came back and just felt that year kind of ruined drinking for me forever, because I had that full year to feel what it felt like for me with nothing. It wasn't easy. Right. I think it was easier because I knew it was only a year, looking back.
Right. Yeah.
Because now that the first year that I did this time around, it was like the longest year of my life. That's the thing when you get sober, you're like, every day is like 7 days. It was so much time. All of a sudden, you're not hungover.
One day at a time.
Yeah.
Just
it's
get
like
through that
7
day.
days actually at a time in one day.
Right.
So I guess I hit like an emotional rock bottom. It wasn't. I have had many rock bottoms in my life.
Yeah.
They're your best teachers.
Yeah, many. And this one particularly, I felt like my outside life didn't look horrible, but it was very stagnant, and I just kept hitting this glass ceiling, which I knew was. I mean, I have. Alcohol, weed, and men were on like every list of habits that I wanted to break. Negative, the big three, I called them, the Holy Trinity. And so I just knew that was kind of that glass ceiling that I kept hitting, but I also just felt like I was rotting from the inside out. I was suicidal. I got on a plane from the East Coast. I had been out east, and I was coming back to LA, and in that 6 hours I was like, oh, I'm just gonna cop heroin and then kill myself when I get back to LA.
That's intense.
Yeah, and that was my best thinking at the time. And and when the heroin thing has always been a red flag for me, because it has been something I've abstained from, and I know that when I'm perseverating on that thought of when it just starts going around and around in my mind, and I'm fixated on the idea of it, that something is not right emotionally. That's like the big. So I ended up going for a hike instead, and then I went to a meeting
instead of death.
Yeah,
that sounds
that's
healthier.
Good. That's good.
So go on a hike.
So I'm not talking to an aberration of you.
No.
I am just talking.
You're actually
I'm educated.
You're talking to like what are those the what did they do it with Tupac, where they had the like
little hologram.
Like the
the hologram. I'm actually a hologram. I'm preaching recovery from beyond the grave. Don't do it.
It's just what it feels like. That's not true. No.
It's so it was good. It was a good decision, I think, and I didn't really intend on staying sober. It was one of those things where I was like
an
I'm just gonna clean up my, I feel like shit and I want to feel better, and then I just kept going.
Yeah.
So this would be an interesting too, because a lot of times people think like, oh, it figures that person would be addiction. Like there's some type of person that gets addicted. What do you feel about that? I mean, what James and I have found is that there is a high relevance of people who deal with substance abuse in oppressed communities. But do you think it's like is it a person who was raised by parents? Is it someone who was exposed? Or is it anybody? Like
I think it's anybody.
Yeah.
You know,
Anyone.
I think it's anybody. There are
Equal
just as many
opportunity.
drunk plumbers as there are artists. It's just that artists tend to be more open about their lifestyle and open about, they have more time to be addicts, I think. They're not working. So I think it can affect anyone. I don't know that it feels very equal opportunity to me, that it can strike. I mean, as we've seen just from high-profile deaths of people who have overdosed,
Right.
and then there's the millions of people who overdose that we don't hear about, who aren't high-profile and who are normal people.
Yeah, well, and I think to your point, Heather, too, it's, you know, oftentimes in oppressed minorities, and I'll talk specifically about LGBTQ community, that the studies do sort of show that there's a higher percentage of people that are using or abusing substances. And again, I think it's really important to recognize that isn't because that is inherent part of having a diverse sexual orientation or gender identity, but that it's actually a way of coping with societal homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, racism, you know, whatever it happens to be, that this is when society is telling you that you're, you know, a sinner or evil or don't even deserve to use a public restroom of your choice or those kinds of things.
Oppression.
It's oppressive, right? And so again, it's oftentimes people use substances as a coping mechanism,
For
as a
having
way
their
of self-soothing.
personal power stolen from them.
Yep.
Don't steal people's personal power. It's a bad idea.
Right.
Oppression.
Yeah.
You know?
So recovery can mean, you know, finding other ways to sort of self-soothe and self-regulate, right? The yogas or the therapies, and again, it's your approach to doing that, right? Because anything can be useful and helpful, and anything can also be sort of detrimental to our health and well-being.
I mean, ironically, I think one of the worst things it can help, like you were saying, it's I guess statistically, I don't know these numbers, but you were just saying that statistically oppressed people, but ironically, I think getting out of the victim mentality is one of the most important things to becoming being able to recover.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because I was
Finding personal empowerment, right? Yeah.
My drug abuse skyrocketed after I was drugged and raped when I was 17. It went from pretty standard young alcoholism to class A narcotics. And I could have kind of hung my coat on that for a long time, but one of the things that I had to do was, you know, come to terms with not feeling, even though I was victimized, not identifying with the victim mentality.
Right.
Because it's easy you can be victimized but not attach yourself to the victim mentality, even
Correct.
though it's very undermining, I think.
And you're talking about patterning, and you know, I've seen this in friends, I've seen this in family, I've caught myself in the act of perpetuating the victim story. And one of the tools, because I think we should talk about some options and treatments that can help people dealing with substance abuse, you know, is to start to catch your behaviors. You know, one of the beautiful things about meditating, even if you're not in the mood to meditate, when you start allowing yourself to meditate, which is just sort of checking in, I like to say, and learning how to be the experiencer and the witnesser of your life at the same time.
Right.
So you're not negating what you're experiencing, but you're also learning how to observe it the way somebody outside of you would.
Right.
So you can start to catch your patterning. Even just recently on Valentine's Day, I caught myself in a cycle of like negative patterning. I'd got this new car and I was like so excited, and then I'm like, but I'm alone and I have nobody to come home to, and I caught myself and I was like, okay, is that what we're going to do?
Yeah.
Right? That's meditation in action. It's not just sitting here and closing your eyes for 20 minutes or whatever a couple times a week. But
it can be like
you start to pattern witness.
Right.
It can be like
And see
sheep
when you're
herding,
becoming the
where
victim.
you have those thoughts pop up, and you're like, okay, you can acknowledge it in a place of mindfulness and compassion for that thought or whatever it is, and then redirect yourself towards a new pattern, right?
Keep the door open. I think the Buddhist nun,
swinging
Padma,
door.
had said that. Yeah, like
Concept.
keep the door open, not to excess, but keeping the door open to emotional experiences that are uncomfortable, because they only stick around when you shut them in.
Right.
So you got to like keep the door open and look at them, and if you need to cry, you cry. If you need to get angry, you get angry. But keep the door open so that they can come in and out instead of closing the door and keeping them in. And that becomes, I think, part of the technique as you're dealing with withdrawal and other things, which is you don't have to pretend that everything is great. It's just keep the door open, start to slowly learn how to redirect attention.
Right.
Yeah.
I think just learning how to sit with discomfort.
Correct.
Because most of us have the desire to, if we have a feeling we don't like, to medicate, to somehow make that feeling go away.
Yep.
We have a society that says if we're not happy 24 hours a day, we should take this pill, do this thing, go on this vacation.
Right. If
Quick
you're
fixes.
depressed. Right. And so I think that it's just, in my experience again, which I can really only speak to, is that I had to learn that some days I would feel off. I kind of wake up feeling off, and it takes me like 20 minutes of meditation, reading my morning frickin' books, I have to do a series of things to get me a little bit to baseline, and not everybody has that. Some people wake up and they're at baseline and they're like tra-la-la, and you know, Disney birds fly around them, and like they don't, and that's not to say
I don't
that
wake up that way.
everybody doesn't have a struggle, but I think that some people are naturally more it's some sense of balance, and then whether that was chemical, and then I moved every year and a half, and so there was never a sense of real stability, and so I always started feeling like the rug was going to get pulled out from underneath it, whatever it is.
Right.
I only have today, and I think this is, I think that in recovery a lot of people have a tendency, or when you're trying to get better from anything, it's like your instinct is to like blame, you're like, well, this and that, and honestly the best thing that ever happened to me was admitting that I was a dumbass, and that I had to take full responsibility for where I was right now.
I
Makes a
can't
huge
believe
difference.
you said that. Remember we were saying what a dumbass she was before she came over? Like before you came over,
dumbass.
and I was just like, oh my God, we have that dumbass
Yeah,
coming
like
on the
that
show
dumbass
today.
is back.
And then you just said it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like that psychic energy is really powerful now that I'm clear.
Right. Well, and sir, our topic again is sex, love, and substance abuse. We've talked a lot about substance abuse and addiction. How have you seen it interacting in your, sexual and love sort of realms, or how do you think that bridges for people?
How does it bridge?
Well, again, I can only speak for myself. I saw during the election, I really was using sex addictively. I was definitely, because I couldn't drink and I couldn't smoke, and I kind of wanted to escape the cycle. Just regardless of what side you're on, I just was tired of all the fighting and all of it. And so I was using a man that was probably bad for me, maybe, but I was using him like a drug. I was just trying to orgasm and escape, and that was, and even when things that I would kind of be left feeling empty, the same feelings, that same feeling afterwards of like emptiness, regret, feeling like he didn't, like I had done something to my own self-worth. Yeah, it was an instant gratification that on the other side of it, I felt very empty. So I know I know what that looks like from substance abuse. I know I was in a relationship with, it was like the one time I've ever been the other woman in a
Triad?
No, it was, I've done that too. It was, he was married, and it would just happened, and we fell really like deeply in love. But when he would leave, I would be like in the fetal position, and I finally got to a point, it was very quickly, it wasn't like it took a long time, thank goodness. But again, because I have this experience with, I know this. This isn't
joy.
good love. This is addiction, or this is
not joy.
compulsion, or this is the feeling of. So I've seen a lot of that overlap in my love and sex life, definitely.
Well, and I imagine that sex at times can also be a really great self-soothing practice, right? Where you're in alignment with your core values and beliefs around sex and sexuality and expressing it and
it becomes a
feeling
great
pleasure.
release.
And that it's actually a tool for your recovery as well, I imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe not. It doesn't speak to your experience.
I would imagine that I couldn't really date anyone the first year that I didn't even know who the fuck I was. Honestly, I had been I feel like I just woke up at year 3. And it was one thing after another kind of in my sobriety that kept hitting me, where they say it's like an onion, but I've been smoking weed daily since I was 12, 13 years old. And I really realized the addiction that I had to that more than anything really else. It's still the hardest one for me.
Interesting, yeah.
And people always say it's not addictive, and I'm like, that is such bullshit.
So that I'm gonna
At least psychologically addictive.
It's bullshit.
I'm going to agree with you on that one. And even though I am not anti-pot smoking, I'm actually pro-pot smoking.
Very pro.
I'm also pro anybody doing what they'd like to do with their life.
Yeah, I'm pro drug use. If you want, great. If you can use drugs like recreationally, go for it. I don't
It's
give
not
a shit.
harmful to your life. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's my stance. But I had several dates with somebody. I was telling James this. I said, it's funny. You don't see any deaths happening, right? So when we're looking at some sort of disease control, nothing happens. So
forever.
That's what I'm saying. So like when you look at Center of Disease Control, I listed off all those stats about the deaths that happen from certain addictive behaviors.
It's so insidious.
But pot wasn't like and neither were hallucinogens, by the way. So hallucinogens and pot were not listed, and yet I can honestly say that when I met someone who I was really digging, he like put a disclaimer out that was like, look, just so you know, it bothers people, but I do smoke a lot of pot, but I have a good job and everything's fine and blah, blah, blah.
I know a lot of people who do.
So like disclaimer, every single time that I saw him, he was stoned and then would be smoking throughout the entire evening if we were on dates. He's like, look, you like wine? I was like, 2 glasses.
Yeah.
Like I'm not looking for more. I don't need more. And then he'd be smoking like 5, 6, 7 times, and then throughout the evening he'd be laying next to him in bed and he's still smoking, and I'm like, okay, this is not going to work for me, and I know it's working for you, and I appreciate your disclaimer, but I'm out.
It was my everything. It was my antidepressant. It was my Ritalin. I didn't even, when I first got sober, the first 2 years, I was so depressed. I mean. It felt chemical, and I think because I had been using marijuana as an antidepressant for 20 years at that point, I didn't have any coping mechanisms for trying to, and I really did think that I was, I don't know, there's like a delusionalness to smoking weed, I think, where you think you're smarter and you think you're better, but I don't know. I'm totally I'm pro marijuana, and I always was, and it's a fucking shame that I got sober before it finally got legal, because I was the kid telling my dad, you'll live to see it legalized, Dad, and he was like, no, I won't. And he was like, you were right. And I'm like, and now I'm sober. And I'm all for it. I think it radiates love, and it's good, and it helps people, but that drug is insidious. It is so insidious.
What's interesting, you just said you used it as an antidepressant, and so my question is that necessarily a bad thing?
Well, and again, I think a lot of this is how something's used, how sex is used, how substances are used. Again, if these things are done to the extent that they have these sort of intense negative consequences, and it destroys your relationships or your employment or your housing or those kinds of things, if it doesn't feel, if you afterwards have that sense of regret, and it's not because of cultural shaming, it's because it doesn't line up with.
But that's what's so insidious about weed, is that it's not these really extreme consequences. There's a really severe moodiness. You'll overshare. It's like little things that they erode at you. You just like, you do. You get that like diarrhea of the mouth. You reach out to people you probably shouldn't reach out to because you smoke, and you're like, oh, it's not that bad. I love
when I'm sober. I can't imagine what I'm doing on a drink or two.
Yeah, I just think that being a lifetime very proud stoner and having it be something that I do think saved me at a certain point in my life. It was probably either that or antidepressants, and honestly I would say go with marijuana if that's and honestly, if I could smoke marijuana and not smoke it, be a regular all day wake and baker from the minute that I smoked it, which I would be, and also have it lead to me being down in Venice and the sun setting and me saying, well, I mean, make no mistake, it is altering your consciousness. You are intoxicated. So it's not a hard leap for me to go from there to getting a beer, and then I'll be doing lines at the townhouse. Like, I know I would probably smoke weed if I didn't think that just altering my consciousness that much would, it's like, oh, well, I'm already there, so what's a drink now?
Well, and that's sex for a lot of people who have connected. In the gay community, a lot of guys will do crystal meth along with sex, and they get so coupled, so paired, that it's hard to sort of extricate when someone's sober, to actually have sex when they're not in a you know, that sort of hyper aroused state of being. And so there can be, like, I know there's a lot of support groups for this sort of thing. And
it's
how
hard
to decouple, because it can be triggering.
Anything.
For substance abuse.
That's the hard thing about getting sober. It's not so. It's living sober that's challenging. It's not the getting sober sucks because of the physical part, but living sober really sucks. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do it unless you have to. That's what I always tell people. You have to want it, but it is, for me, drinking and writing and smoking weed and writing were just like inextricably linked. And it took me like a year to really get back into a flow where I could sit down and write. When I was using heroin, I was smoking the dragon a lot. I couldn't look at tinfoil for like 2 years. And now I'm like, oh, I can look at tinfoil, and it's not like I want heroin. So that is the hard thing when you get...
And just to sort of wrap things up, there are treatment options. If you're dealing with substance abuse, if you think your partner is dealing with substance abuse, or if someone you love and you know is dealing with substance abuse, there are options besides 12 Steps. And I know that 12 Steps is the most popular program. And again, we just want to wrap up here. But, 12 Steps has been shown to be successful and not successful, both. But what it does provide is a nice social support group, which is important when you're dealing with addiction and recovery.
Right, and there's an access issue, which is that there's a lot more 12 steps available than there is things like harm reduction groups or moderation management or sober recovery. There's lots of different sort of approaches to doing this.
I laugh at the idea of moderation management. I mean, good for anyone who can do that. God bless you.
It's not for everybody, right?
No, it's not.
You got to find what works for you.
It took me a long time to really have to admit that abstinence was really the only way for me.
Right.
That's the only path for me. It took me 20 years to really humbly accept that, and still I kick and scream about it. Because nobody wants to be abstinent.
Right.
But I know what it looks like. I'm the same joy that radiates out now, and I see the effects in my life as a sister and a member of society. That was the negative. And you see, look at these numbers, you see what addiction does to our communities, and it is gnarly. Drinking, I mean, how many drunk driving accidents are there a day?
Right.
And that destroys lives.
88,000 people a year on the small end. So that being said, if you or your partner are dealing with substance abuse, there's lots of options for treatment. 12 steps are readily available, but you can have social support groups, therapy, rational recoveries, he said. Some people can do moderation management, not everybody. Acupuncture, if you got some extra cash, helps with withdrawal symptoms. Hypnosis.
The ear points.
The ear points are great.
Those are the best.
But, again, just assess to yourself, is my use of a particular substance creating harmful consequences in my life, my work, my love life, my personal health and well-being, and so forth? And then, adjust accordingly.
And I would say if you are in a relationship, get support for yourself. Because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And
Correct.
If I've seen people lose their families, their kids. Like when you are in addiction, I don't know if either one of you has any experience with it, but there's nothing really that can stop you. There's no amount. I mean, there's always another bottom. And so I think the important thing, if you are in a relationship with someone who is in addiction, that you focus more on getting yourself help.
You're talking to someone who is a fixer and a saver, and oftentimes when I go out on dates getting to know people, I try to get to see if they have addictions.
Right.
If they do, I usually wind up walking away because I know what I will become.
Right.
Not because they're bad people, but I know what I'm going to do.
Right.
And I will lose all sense of self in trying to fix and
Brings
save
out
and
the
help.
caretaker in you,
Right.
despite being able to sort of
And
have
so
more
I have to walk
reciprocity
away.
and really
Yeah.
But I'm always like, when you get this under control, or if you want to, you don't need to, give me a ring.
And there's a lot of support for people who are in, either children of, adult children of, like, codependent.
Yes.
There's a lot of support. Go to therapy.
Right.
Deal with your own stuff.
Well, so
Thank
how can
you.
people find your blogs, your comedy shows?
Bridget Phetasy, Phetasy. That is where my shows are. But on Playboy, it's called Just the Tips. That's
I love that name.
That's the name of the column. And I'm now doing the Playboy Advisor in the magazine. So subscribe to Playboy, guys.
Nice.
And by the way, we're nude again.
That's right. I saw that. His son made it nude.
I know. Go Cooper. So I'm doing the Advisor, and they just gave me another page, which is exciting. So now I have
Congratulations.
it's good. So that's cool. And then on the Fix, Bridget Phetasy, if you just Google the author name, you can find whatever I've written for them.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Bridget.
Thank you for having
sharing
me.
your story. You came and were a guest on our first year on air, and so
Appreciate having you
we
back.
appreciate having you back.
Oh,
You're
anytime. I
always
love
great.
being here.
We
Thank
love
you.
having you.
It's fun.
And thank you. You can reach us at the James Heather Show, right?
Yes.
James Heather Show on Twitter and
TheJamesandHeatherShow.com.
Yeah.
And you can call us, phone number below, with your questions, comments, feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Have a great one.
Bye.
Bye.